Hi, Melissa. This is Karen Anderson again. And even though I've already made a couple of videos for you of some powerful spiritual experiences I've had, I've felt to make this one in addition. It's one that's really colored the whole unfoldment of our work over the past 30 odd years. And it's something that I would just like to talk about with you. So, back in the early days, when I got together with Barry, God brought us together in an unmistakable way. And we had begun to do the work that he had been shown briefly right before we met. And Barry had been teaching me the way that he had been facilitating sessions with people, helping people get in touch with who they really are, coming out of the trance of the ego mind and dropping into the space in the soul, in the heart of hearts, the soul lotus, the soul space. These were different ways that we've referred to that space over the years. And so I realized that I needed to do that myself. I had never really gotten in touch with that internal space. Even though I had meditated over the years, I had never really had a profound experience of my own innermost being. So in my meditation time, I began to bring my awareness into that space. And I began to just breathe and feel and see what was there. And in the beginning, there wasn't much at all that was there. I found myself inside of a big dark cave. And every day I would just go inside and I would see that cave again in my heart, in my soul space. And I would think, wow, other people have all these beautiful, sublime spiritual experiences. Other people have all kinds of glamorous things happening. But when I go inside, all I'm getting is this big dark cave. Is there something wrong with me? Am I just a spiritual laggard? Or what is going on here? Why is it the way it is with me? It just really confirmed all the feelings of self-condemnation and self-doubt and all the lack of confidence that I'd always felt in myself, especially spiritually. I knew so many people that had had beautiful spiritual experiences, and people were having them in the sessions that we were facilitating. But I myself had not really had those blessings come to me yet. So every day I would just continue to go inside and I would sit myself down in this big dark cave. And for some reason, I just felt compelled to keep going, even though very little was happening for me. There was something in me that was keeping me showing up, maybe saying, give me a little clue that this is going somewhere, just stay with it. One day I brought my awareness inside that cave and I saw a tiny flame in the center of it. Just a tiny flame on the floor of the cave. So I went over and I sat down in front of it and I was just with that little flame. And I realized, well, this doesn't seem like much, but at least it's something that's happening. And so every day, after that, I would just bring my awareness back inside, go into the cave, and the flame would get a little bit larger with each day or every few days. I would notice that it was getting bigger now. And one day I went in there and realized it was about the size of a campfire. So I would sit down in front of the campfire and I would just bask in the warmth and the glow and feel myself comforted and sustained in a way by the presence of that flame within me, that fire that was growing stronger without my doing anything at all. So that continued over probably a period of weeks, going inside, being with that campfire, basking in the warmth, hoping that there was some meaning in all of this. It was all a mystery to me, so I was just present for the unfoldment of it, but didn't really know a lot about what was going on. Then one day, as I brought my awareness to my inner world, I found that the fire was no longer in the cave, it was outside the cave, and it was hanging on a stand right at the doorway to the cave. I realized that the fire now was on a torch, and it was something that you could take wherever you wanted to take it. So as I was standing there, just kind of absorbing this big new change in what was going on in the inner landscape, I looked at the doorway to the cave and I heard the words internally, the cave of the resurrection. And they made a big impact on me, but again, I didn't really have a sense of what it all meant. I turned around and looked around the outside of the cave, and I realized there was a beautiful garden all around that cave and all around the entrance. And the garden had lots of flowers blooming. It had bushes and trees growing. It had pathways that you could walk. It felt like a beautiful, serene, and healing space. And I just was marveling at it, looking all around. I didn't find myself walking on the paths, but I was just standing outside the cave, reveling in the beauty of this unexpected appearance of a garden. And inwardly, I again heard some words, and this time they said, the garden of the resurrection. And that was another big download that just dropped into my consciousness. And as I stood there, just absorbing those words, I heard an additional message. You are the garden of the resurrection. And everything in me kind of went, me? What do you mean? I stood there and I just did my best to open to what I was hearing and to believe that it could be true about me. A person that had always felt like she was a spiritual laggard, that she didn't have the spiritual blessings that other people had. I kept waiting, and years would go by, and I would watch lots of my friends and people I knew having these wonderful openings and beautiful, things that they had been gifted with, appearances of ascended masters or whatever it was. I was having nothing like that happening. But now suddenly I was being told that I was the garden of the resurrection. Although it was super hard for my mind and my emotional body to accept it, I just began to feel that there was something in me that was opening to it, that was realizing that there must be some truth in this. I couldn't have made these words up. I don't even think like this. And then something happened to make me realize that the cave was the cave of Christ's tomb, and that in that tomb he had experienced the ultimate in resurrection, and that he had actually ascended after being in that cave. And I wrote some things down at the time that we wrote our third book, We Are the Awakening Christ, that I thought I would read right now, because it's something that came to me then, but that I don't consciously think about very often now. It seemed highly significant that I was not told I was the cave of the resurrection, but the garden. In the cave or tomb, Jesus went through the transmutation that would leave an imprint like no other on his burial shroud and would eventuate in the ascension. He would go on from this world into a higher realm, returning to his ultimate home. But the people I was to connect with were to live out the transformations they experienced in sessions here, within the third dimensional world, for a while longer at least. The resurrections that I, as the garden, would catalyze were intended to bring people deeper into the livingness of the physical realm, with its flowers and sunsets and rivers flowing over mossy rocks. The garden is a friendly, inviting space, unlike the austerity of the cave in which Jesus transformed into a Christ. A garden's organic cycles of rising up and falling away remind us that resurrection is a natural process, one to be embraced and welcomed instead of feared and avoided. Yet I had spent the bulk of this lifetime within the dark cave of forgetting my true divine nature. I had incarnated into a family in which people killed themselves when they no longer remembered who they were or why they were here. Some committed outright suicide, while others drank to distraction or lived dangerously. My own struggles to remain alive and engaged in the face of crippling self-condemnation had severely taxed some previous relationships and prevented me from confidently actualizing my God-given abilities. And so I realized, okay, I'm the garden of the resurrection. I don't know what that means. I'm going to have to live into what that is about in the unfoldment of my life pattern. And so shortly after that, God brought a series of women who wanted to work with only me and had all experienced childhood sexual abuse. And at first I wondered, why is God bringing me these people? That has not been part of my history. I've had other really difficult things to work with, but not that one. And so I didn't even know if I was capable of facilitating any kind of transformations, transfigurations, breakthroughs with these women, because I did not know a lot or anything personally about what they were experiencing. But somehow I heard the message, pain is pain. And if you've experienced one kind of suffering, you can probably be there for other kinds. And so the series of sessions unfolded, and in each one of them, the woman was able to go into some of her deepest pain and suffering. Often she had been carrying it around for years, just waiting for this moment, somehow being brought together with me. And even though many of these women had gone through years of various types of therapy and experiences that were designed to help them through, they still were carrying around the burden of all this pain and suffering from what they had gone through. And so what unfolded in the sessions followed a very similar pattern. Even though these women had not met each other, they didn't know each other, nobody had talked to each other about what was going on. But what we found was that as I held a space, the space of being the garden of the resurrection, each woman dove into the deepest depths of the pain and the suffering. The tears flowed, the anger emerged, the rage, the disappointment, the hopelessness, the despair, the wondering if God had abandoned them. All the deepest layers of everything were being faced and embraced and felt. And of course, we would always be turning everything over to the divine, to the soul within, the divine within, and to the divine as a whole. And one by one, each of these women found their way through no prompting of mine whatsoever, and not even mentioning the word, to a place of forgiveness. They found that when they felt everything to the bottom, when they released the hold on it that it had over their lives, when they were able to turn everything over to the divine, they were taken into a place of compassionate ability to see the perpetrators that had brought so much of everything, so much agony, so much horror, so much pain, so much suffering into their lives. They were able to see those beings as wounded themselves, that they could do no other than the way they had been treated, perhaps as children, or maybe later on. The details varied, but the bottom line was that they could see that these beings were wounded and could only perpetuate that wounding. They could see that this was not a personal attack. It was not something that had to do with them as women, as children, as little girls. They could see that it had nothing to do with them, that this was just something that this person was expressing that was all they were capable of expressing because they were so wounded, because they themselves had never received the kind of loving care that every soul needs. And so this series of sessions showed me that all I really had to do was show up. I didn't have to know anything. I didn't have to be an expert in anything. I didn't have to have experienced what these women were experiencing myself. None of that was needed for the complete death and rebirth to happen in each of these sessions. And so being the Garden of the Resurrection has unfolded over the decades since that initial experience. And often when people come and they begin to dive into some really painful places inside themselves, I hear the words inside, I am the resurrection and the life. I feel the presence of Christ, and I hear the words that he said. And I know that this is something that we can all call upon whenever we're feeling that we're up against the deepest, darkest places in ourselves or in somebody else, and that we as human beings have no idea what to do with it, how to move with it, and how to come through it to a new place. And so I am the resurrection and the life, and calling upon the resurrecting power of the Christ have become central to our work. And whenever a session goes into that kind of territory, those words just automatically come up in my consciousness. And I begin to go into that space of calling it forth, just calling forth the presence of Christ and the presence of his resurrecting power, which does everything. All we need to do is remember that and ask it to come forth. So thank you for listening. I've really enjoyed sharing these stories with you, Melissa. And I wish you love and blessings. Namaste.